All right, what's good, everybody? Today we're moving on in Chapter 0. Today's review lesson 0.3. We're going to be talking about fractions, decimals, and percentages. How you can switch from each of these forms back between them. Okay, here's the slide that's obviously going to have the lesson video link on it after I finish making it. In class, I'll ask if there's any questions from homework 2. Okay, fun facts. Fun facts begin. Fractions, percents, and decimals. Those are the three things that we're talking about in this lesson. Fun facts. Those are different ways of expressing the exact same thing. So a fraction is a percent is a decimal, and so on and so forth. They are all the same, just written in different ways. Okay, a very easy basic example would be a fraction is 1/2. A 1/2 as a percent would be 50%. And 1/2 as a decimal or 50% as a decimal would be 0.5. Okay, so three different ways, all meaning the same thing. Okay, before we talk about how to switch in between each of these things, then we need to discuss what they are actually. Okay, fractions are a way to express a division problem. Okay, so whenever we see a fraction, hey, notice whenever you see a fraction, it's literally a division symbol, right? That is why the division symbol is a line with a dot on top and a dot on bottom. Okay, this is reference to a number over a number, which is how you write a fraction. Fraction is a division problem. Okay, so whenever you see 1/2, that means 1 over 2 or 1 divided by 2. 3/4 means 3 divided by 4. Even if you have a crazy, ridiculous example like 1,235 over 5,743, that just means you take the 1,235 and you divide it by 5,743. Next is a decimal. Decimals represents parts of a whole. Decimals have place values. On your notes, it might be a little bit hard to see the writing there, so if you want, you should write it a little bit darker. But the first place in the decimal is the tenths, the second is the hundredths, the third is the thousandths, and the fourth is the 10,000ths place. Okay? And percent, the word percent is Latin. It literally translates to per 100. Okay, so that means percent is always out of 100. So an example would mean that 20% means 20 out of 100, 63% means 63 out of 100, so on and so forth. Obviously, a lot of things aren't actually out of 100. That's why it's important to be able to switch back and forth between these three of fractions, decimals, and percentages. Like, for example, you're going to take a test, and the test is only going to be out of 27 points. Okay, if you get 21 out of 27, okay, that does correlate to a percentage, but it's not out of 100 points. It was only out of 27. But because it's starting out as a fraction, that means you can change that fraction to a percentage and still know what that percentage is, even though it's not out of 100. Now we'll start going over the different ways of how we can change from one form to another. So first we're going to talk about going from a fraction to a decimal. Okay, remember, a fraction is just a way to express a division problem. So to change a fraction to a decimal, you simply just do the division problem. Again, 1/2 means that it's 1 divided by 2. If you were to type that into a calculator, 1 divided by 2 would give you 0.5. 3/4 means that it's 3 divided by 4. If you were to type that into a calculator, that would change to 0.75. Next is going from a decimal to a percentage. Okay, the technical way to change a decimal to a percent is to take the decimal and multiply it by 100, because remember, percent means out of 100. However, the easy rule to change any decimal to a percent is to simply just move the decimal point 2 places to the right. Okay, so when you multiply things by 100, that's all that you do is you take the decimal and you move it 2 places. So for example, 0.28, you move that decimal point 2 places. Now it's here. 0.28 becomes 28%. 0.3, we move the decimal twice. There's a blank space. Whenever there's a blank space, we add a 0. So 0.3 becomes 30%. Now, be careful. These are two very similar situations. We have 0.3 and we have 0.03. When you move the decimal 2 places in 0.03, it becomes 3%. Okay, so just be careful about zeros when you're dealing with moving things. And then if you have decimals, that are more than two numbers, okay, once again, you still just move the decimal twice. So 0.245, you move the decimal there, it comes 24.5%. If you have a decimal 0.037527495, again, you still just move the decimal two places, which means that it goes right there and you end up with 3.7527495%. Changing a fraction to a percentage. Unfortunately, there isn't a quick and easy way to go directly from a fraction to a percentage. Therefore, we change the fraction to a decimal first, and then once we have that decimal, then we change that decimal to a percentage. Luckily, we've gone over both of those things, so we know how to do that, right? We change the fraction to a decimal just by dividing. So 1/2 becomes 1 divided by 2. 1 divided by 2 gives you 0.5. Now that we have 0.5, now we can move that decimal two places. We have a blank space, so we put a 0 there, and 0.5 becomes 50%. 5/8. 5 divided by 8 becomes 0.625. We move the decimal two places. 0.625 becomes 62.5%. To change a percentage to a decimal, the technical way to change a percentage to a decimal is now to divide the percentage by 100, because again, whenever we're dealing with percent, that means per 100. And then the opposite of multiplying by 100 and dividing by 100 means that now the shortcut, we just take the percentage and we move the decimal point two places to the left. Okay, so when you have a percent and you want to go to decimal, you take the decimal and move it twice to the left this time. So again, here is the decimal. Now we're going to in the opposite direction. I don't know why I did that. And you would put the decimal there. So 28% becomes 0.28. 33.3%, we move the decimal twice. It comes out to the front, 0.333. And 100%, fun fact, 100% is just 1. Because we move that decimal out twice. So that takes up the place of those two zeros, and we have 1.0. Okay, a decimal to a fraction. Hey, remember when we said that decimals have place values, right? Well, this time we use the place values, okay? We use the place values to change a decimal to a fraction. The way that we do that, we have 3 steps. Put the decimal number on the top of the fraction. The top of the fraction is called the numerator. Then we take the last place value of the decimal and put that on bottom of the fraction. The bottom of the fraction is called the denominator. And then we simplify that fraction if necessary. So our example was 0.15. If we take 0.15, what's the number of the decimal? The number is 15. Okay, then we take the place value. What's the place value of the 5? We see here that the place value of the 5 is in the hundredths place. That's why we put it over 100. So now 0.15 as a fraction is 15 over 100. But then we simplify that here. We divide both sides by 5. 5 divided by 5 gives us 3. 100 divided by 5 gives us 20. So now 3 over 20 is the simplified version of 0.15. Okay, and I believe this is the last one. Okay, going from a percentage to a fraction, because percent again means per 100, we can change any percent to a fraction by simply taking the percentage and putting on top of 100 in a fraction. Then we just simplify the fraction. Okay, so we have 28%. Again, 28% means 28 out of 100, so you change that to the fraction of 28 over 100. With 28 over 100, we can simplify. We divide both of those by 4. 28 divided by 4 gives you 7, and 100 divided by 4 gives you 25, which is why you end up with a simplified fraction of 7 over 25. Okay, more fun facts to finish up with. Okay, you don't need to write anything here, but it's just something to keep in mind. Whenever we simplify fractions, we're not actually changing the fraction. We're just changing the way that we view it to make it easier on us. For example, 1/2 is the same thing as 3/6, which is the same thing as 4/8, which is the same thing as 5/10. And the way that we know that is because when we change the fraction to a decimal, the decimals all become the same thing, okay? This then opens up the door to discuss ratios and scale factors, which is something that we're going to be doing later on this year. So again, a quick and easy example, right? The way we think of fractions, think about the pizza or the pie, right? If we have half, that's half. If we have a pizza cut into fourths, 2/4 is still half. Okay, if we were to cut this into sixths, right? 3/6 is still half of the pizza. And again, so we can see that visually by using the pizza, but mathematically we know it's the truth because no matter what we do, 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. 2 divided by 4 is 0.5. 3 divided by 6 is 0.5. So we can see it now mathematically as well because they always come out to the same decimal. Okay, so that's just a nice little fun fact to finish with and a way to think about ratios because we're going to talk about those later on in the year. Okay, that's all that I have. Okay, we only have, I believe, one more lesson in chapter 0, so that will be the next lesson. Great job. Go Mustangs.